welcome to The Next Element. I'm your host, Deb Valentine. Over the past decade, we've seen an explosion in interest over alternative therapies and treatments. Today, we're going to explore herbalism. Susan Elliotson is a registered medical herbalist and is here today to talk about herbal remedies and treatments. Welcome, Susan.
I'm glad to be here.
So, first off, Susan, very simply, what is herbal medicine?
Herbal medicine is using plants to treat illness in human beings, or actually in animals as well. But it's as simple as that. Anybody can read a book and call themselves a herbalist, and they can set up practice. And there is no regulation in Canada to prevent that. So in Ontario and in several other provinces, we have local provincial bodies that set standards, test people to make sure they're properly qualified, and then they're given the designation RH for Registered Herbalist. So if you see that, you know that that person has training and experience, and you can trust what they tell you to do.
So you know you're going to get safe and effective treatments or remedies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So how is herbal medicine different from modern day pharmaceuticals? And even if you want to talk a little bit about naturopath treatments and homeopathic, traditional Chinese medicine, like there's so many designations. So how does what you do differ from some of these other professions?
Okay, well, pharmaceuticals is looking more at the drugs that they produce. And a lot of the pharmaceuticals came from plants originally, and they have looked at them and picked apart the constituents that are in the plant, because there could be 100 or more in any individual plant. And they decide, well, this is the constituent that has the action we want. So they isolate it and they make it stronger, they concentrate it, and then they patent it as a drug. And that's often where you get side effects, because all of those other constituents that they've taken out of the plant actually work with the active constituent, and they buffer. That happened with aspirin.
Okay.
Which is why you get negative things happening with aspirin. In terms of naturopaths, they work with a lot of different modalities, and they work with herbs, but they don't have the extensive training that a herbalist would get if they've done a full program and qualified to be a registered herbalist. In fact, a naturopath, and we have several in the Ontario Herbalist Association who are both naturopaths and registered herbalists, and they take an extra 200 hours of strictly herbal training before they qualify to be an RH. Homeopaths, of course, often they're the same plants, but homeopathics works on the principle of like takes like. So if you have an upset stomach, you take a homeopathic that would create an upset stomach in a very large dose. So they have then reduced the dose. They take what they call a mother tincture, which is what I would use straight on, but they reduce it and they reduce it and they reduce it 5 or 6 times, which is what the X's and things mean when you buy a homeopathic. So that you can't find any trace of the plant in there, but they still work. They still have an effective an action on the body.
Oh, wow.
So it's a different approach. And traditional Chinese medicine, actually all three, naturopathic, homeopathic, and traditional Chinese medicine, are all regulated. So that sets them apart, because herbalists are not regulated. We're self-governing. We've taken our action to make sure that we can give the public what's safe without having any regulated intervention. Traditional Chinese medicine does go beyond just using plants. They use animal parts and they use minerals, and they combine things often in a different way than, Western herbal medicine is really how I was trained. And they have a long history that proves that what they have works. So we do use, Western herbal medicines have adopted a few herbs that are traditional Chinese herbs, and we're very grateful that we have their history behind them to show us how they work and how effective they can be.
Okay, perfect. So now we've switched a little bit. We're talking a little bit. You've given us a little direction on the history. And I mean, herbal remedies have been around for a very long time in many different traditions. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a little bit about the history of healing with herbs here in North America?
Yes, of course, that came originally from indigenous people who shared what they knew with settlers, the early settlers who were willing to learn from the natives. that didn't always stay that way, but a lot of what we call Western, which includes European, but it includes a lot of North American herbs as well. There was a man in the early 1800s, someone who had no education but saw he had illness in his family, and he took the native, what they told him, and he promoted that, and that eventually became the medical system. In the 1800s, they were called eclectics, and they were doctors who would take a little bit of knowledge from one source or another source and put them all together, which in a way is what I do, because I draw also from Ayurvedic healing. And so the doctors of the 1800s, and they were very scientific in their own way, evidence-based and microscopically looking at the plants to find out what was in them and what worked and what was safe. And then, this gets political, the early 1900s, the American government brought in income tax. So you had people like Rockefeller and DuPont and Carnegie who had all this money, did not want to pay income tax. So they went for the charitable exemption. And they put money in, first of all, they did a study to look at how doctors were trained and found that there was a wide range. I mean, there were the good schools that gave really good, excellent training to doctors. There were other schools that were okay, but they could be improved. And then there were people who would just hang around with a doctor for 6 months and say, okay, I know enough, and they'd go out and call themselves a doctor and practice medicine. So out of that report, there was, they actually went into the hospitals and had those 3 categories, and the people in the C category were more or less, they were out of business. And the eclectics did not meet the standards of the other 2 higher levels, mainly because they were using a lot of plants, because one of the people who was putting money into this whole project was DuPont, which was a drug company. So those eclectics sort of faded out by the mid-30s. I think the last eclectic school was actually in Canada. And they're still around. Their records are there, and herbalists can draw on them and learn from them. It's not accepted as evidence-based medicine, but it's traditional knowledge. So.
Okay, and so we talked about the Ontario governing body and how it governs some of these other professions, and that the registered herbalist is sort of self-governing. So can you tell us a little bit about that body of folks that are kind of looking out for the rest of us?
Yes, okay. So Ontario Herbalist has been around for a little over 40 years. Herbalists getting together and realizing that there was legislation called the Drugless Practitioners Act, and that originally covered the naturopaths, the homeopaths. And once they had their own legislation, that kind of left a hole. And there really hasn't been any other legislation to take that place. So the herbalists said, well, we have to protect ourselves. And so the OHA has bylaws, they have code of ethics, standards of practice, what you can and cannot do, what's ethical. And if someone decides that they want to become a professional member of the Ontario Herbalist, there are actually 3 categories of membership. Professionals are the practicing herbalists, student members who are learning, and then general public who want to support, and they get newsletters and information about events and things that are going on. But the way the OHA operates in terms of people wanting to become registered herbalists, there is a fairly complex process they have to go through in terms of submitting resumes, submitting what their intentions are, submitting case studies so that other herbalists can look at them and see, do these look safe? Do they look like they know what they're talking about? They have to have reference letters. Then they have to go through an interview process with experienced herbalists who will ask questions largely geared to what would you do in a situation where somebody comes to you with a certain problem, because we also have to recognize our limits. We want to work with the medical world because they certainly know what they're doing. And if the person still doesn't satisfy everybody through the interview process, then there would be an additional examination, an assessment to ask more, direct, targeted questions.
Okay, so you were mentioning working with the modern technologies or modern medicine. So then herbalism and modern medicine so they're not opposing forces then, they can be complementary?
Absolutely complementary, yeah. As a medical herbalist, I always want to see blood tests. I check blood pressure, I look in the ears and throat and palpate abdomens and, whatever seems to be indicated by what the person says their issue is. So, and look at other medical reports as well. And there are clinics that include doctors, naturopaths, chiropractors, herbalists, other nutritionists often, all in one group so that they all work together on an individual patient. For those of us who are sort of out there on our own, I very frequently refer people back to the doctor for blood tests or other issues where I'm not sure what's going on, or I think that there is attention needed that I can't give.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just still in that same vein, so if a person is sort of using both systems of healing, is there possible interactions between herbal remedies and Western pharmaceuticals? Like, should you be telling your doctor that you're taking these herbal treatments?
Yes, and absolutely part of my intake is to find out what medications they may be taking, prescription medications, so I know that I have to stay away from certain things, or if it's something I don't know, a medication I haven't come across, then I do my research. I also want to know what supplements they're taking. I also want to know if whatever their problem is, what have you done already? Has your doctor prescribed something? How did that work?
Right, okay.
And I've noticed sort of Orangeville and north of here, doctors are open. At the very least, they're tolerant, but they're often, they accept the fact that there's also herbal things going on. And they may just say, well, I don't know anything about the herbs, so I've never had one try to contact me, but I have had doctors say to the patient, someone who ended up in the ER for something else and had a bad reaction to what the ER did, and the doctor said, you just stay with your herbalist.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, but south of here, Mississauga, whole different attitude.
Oh, they don't want anything to do with you.
No. They won't even do the tests that I suggest that would be beneficial to get information for the person. So I just work with what I can, the information I can get.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Susan, we're going to go for a quick little break, and stay tuned. And when we come back, we'll continue our journey into the world of herbalism.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Calling all journalism students, Omni Television is once again awarding scholarships to qualified students pursuing a career in third language journalism.
Having this opportunity to envision what life as a foreign language journalist could look like is crucial to determining where I make my next career move. I can't wait to start putting this funding to use.
Omni is home to a variety of locally produced current affairs programs and daily national newscasts, broadcast in 6 languages. To learn more about Omni scholarships, visit omnitv.ca/scholarships.
The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Welcome back to The Next Element. I'm Deb Valentine. I'm here with Susan Elliotson, and we're talking about natural healing solutions, specifically herbal medicine. So, Susan, we were talking before the break about working together with Western medicine and herbal remedies. So the Western or the allopathic remedies come in different forms, pills or liquids or creams, and how much the same or how different is an herbal remedy?
Okay, I could deliver herbs in any of the forms you mentioned, but my favorite way is a tincture, which is an alcoholic extraction. So if it's summertime, we'll harvest in the morning, we'll process the herb by chopping it up, putting it in the alcohol in the afternoon, labeling everything, record keeping is extremely important, and let it sit for a month or longer, depending. And then put it through a tincture press. And my first tincture press was actually a wine press. I now have one from a food store for processing whatever. And that way we get the maximum amount of alcoholic extraction back. And they're saved in individual bottles, like different herb in each bottle. And then if I'm making a formula for somebody, usually 4 or 5 herbs, depending, they have different actions or they support the same action, because this is where the brain work comes in. And mixing it together and labeling it and telling people, you know, you take, usually it's a teaspoon 3 times a day, which is what, because drugs come a pill. We can take 1 pill a day, 1 pill a week, 1 injection, whatever. But again, with prescription things, there can be negatives that pop into the picture. Anyway, then we can do teas, herbal teas. So we've dried the herb and again combined it, several different together, grind them up because that makes it easier to get a uniform measurement, teaspoon, in your cup of water 3 times a day. Don't even have to drink it hot most of the time. Some teas work only when they're hot, others work anytime. And we make ointments, again, from fresh herb plants, usually in the summertime. We can apply things as a poultice, which is the plant directly on the skin, or we can do a compress, where we put the cloth in the tea, usually, or a decoction, and I get back to a decoction in a minute, and then the compress goes directly on the skin. A decoction is for hard parts of the plant, like the roots or berries that require more than just an infusion in it as a tea. So those we put in cold water, let them sit overnight, and then bring them to a boil and simmer them at a low temperature for 20 or 30 minutes. And then pour that off, and a person would drink it the same way as they drank a tea. You can infuse a herb in a decoction if you want to combine plants that really wouldn't work if you use the same extraction method for both. You can make syrups, make a really excellent cough syrup in a glycerin base so it tastes well, as good as soothing your throat, and capsules. We can make capsules. I'm not thrilled about that because it takes a lot more fiddly work to do it. And in order to get the herb into the capsule, you've got to grind it into a very fine powder. And the finer the powder, the faster the herb will deteriorate. And if people have digestive issues, they may not be able to break down the capsule.
Okay.
And they may not be able to absorb the powder that's in the capsule. So the tea and the tincture particularly are delivery methods that make it easier for the body to absorb the herb.
Okay, so is a tincture stronger than a tea? Okay, so it just depends on the ailment, I guess, that you would...
No, it depends on the plant, because some things are the constituents you want are water soluble, and you only need a 25% alcohol for that. That's for preserving. Anything lower than that, you risk growing molds or whatever. Sometimes what's in the plant are resins or gums or other things that only dissolve in alcohol. So there are some plants that need 90-95% alcohol. Okay. And those can be really harsh. You have to dilute them, measure out the amount you want, dilute it in a liquid before you swallow it.
Okay.
I also forgot about the vinegars. Oh. We can use vinegar as an extracting agent, and sometimes it works better than alcohol, depending on the constituent you want.
Interesting. Now, how long does an herbal treatment take? Because, I mean, you know, here in the West, we want everything like that.
Oh, yeah, so do people who come for herbal treatment. And it really depends. This is where it does depend on the ailment. There are some things that work in half an hour. You'll see a response. There are other things where the treatment should go on for at least 3 months, other times 6 months, sometimes even longer than that. And it isn't just the ailment, it's also the individual and their own reserves.
Okay.
Because stress does a nasty thing to your adrenal glands, and your adrenals are connected to your immune system. And if you don't have a good basis, what we call the deep immune system, some of the other things won't work as well.
So adrenal fatigue is a real thing then?
Oh, it absolutely is. It is, yes, and it can be helped. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So, we're talking about how to, depending on the plant, whether you're using the plant or the root or what the type of plant is and how you're going to prepare it. But can you tell us a little bit about the quality of the plants used in herbal medicine, and what do you look at to determine the quality of a plant?
Okay, because I grow a lot of my own plants, I know what they should look like. I know how, when they're properly dried, and I know that after a certain length of time I can see how the quality will have diminished. So that comes with experience working with the plants. So if I run out of a plant, which does happen this time of year, and it's very frustrating because I know I could grow this plant myself, but I have to buy it, I can tell when I get that whether it's a good sample or not. And I've seen really bad stuff come through from a reputable supplier. And on the other hand, I've seen really good stuff come through, so that I immediately ordered more. Because even though I didn't need it immediately, I knew it would last, because it was so good to start with. So you're looking at color, taste, and smell mainly, to determine whether it's in good shape.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about what wildcrafting is?
Okay, wildcrafting is mainly, well, I was going to say for people who don't have their own gardens, but I wildcraft in a few situations. It's where you go out somewhere on property that you don't own. And the biggest thing that you should be doing if you're wildcrafting before you go on another piece of property is you find out who owns it, what the history of the land is, did it have any kind of chemicals or pollutants, fertilized crops. And you'll find that by talking to the owner, and most farmers will say, why? What do you want that stuff for? But on the other hand, you get the owner's permission. I mean, I hear things on the radio about people foraging for food, and this is lovely, but would you go in the city up to somebody's front yard and start picking their flowers? It's the same idea.
Yeah, good point.
You can get really good things foraging because the plants have chosen where they're growing. And a lot of the endangered plants, I grow some of them, but I've chosen where they grow. And that doesn't mean that they're going to be as happy as if they had found their own spot in nature.
Okay, so you mentioned endangered plants. So with the explosion of natural healing techniques and even pharmaceutical companies entering into the herbal marketplace, in your opinion, is this having an effect on the ability to locate quality plants?
It has had more of an effect on people, and I mean commercial people harvesting huge amounts for sale, doing it improperly, and thus destroying the patch. Because the rule herbalists are taught is that when you find a patch, you only harvest from 1/3 of that patch. And you don't just, here's your patch, you don't just harvest from here. You take some scattered throughout the patch to get biodiversity, genetic, you don't want to destroy any genetic material. Then when you get the plants that you're going to harvest from, you only take 1/3 of that plant. You make sure that there's enough plant left to produce seed to continue it. If you're taking the root of a plant, you would only take a section of the root, leave enough root to keep that plant going, and maybe tamp it back in, give it a bit of water, because you can't function without the herbs, right?
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to be responsible about it then.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, when we're talking about big corporations, they're not necessarily practicing this in a responsible manner.
Well, and what they're doing is biting their nose to spite their face or whatever, because chaga is a good example. It's a fungus that grows out of trees, and if you cut the external part, it will keep growing. But they come along and they whack out the bark, and that's gone. There's nothing left. There may be some spores, but there may not.
Right. Okay. So, you know, we have species at risk lists. Do we have plant risk lists?
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay.
You can just Google at-risk plants, and you can get them for Ontario, for Canada, and they will do other animals and insects and things, but they'll look at plants. They're not focused on herbs specifically, but there are, I checked this out yesterday, there are some of the endangered plants there, and there's two categories. Endangered means you really have to be very, very careful. Mm-hmm. At risk means it's getting there, but, you know, be responsible and this. For instance, trilliums. For years we were told, don't pick trilliums. But I would say in the last 50 years, people with cottages, they've all brought trilliums back to their place in the city. So there are more patches of trilliums growing now. And we could be doing that with other plants.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. Is there like an association that looks out for this, or is this just basically? Because I mean, I know there's the endangered species list that the government has, but is there an association that maybe looking at different plants at risk or endangered plants? There
is an association that does, and I haven't got the name right at the top of my head. But they have a plant sale once a year, selling these plants. So I've gotten plants from them, and it's. I can send you this after the show, but at the moment I can't remember it. But yeah, they're looking at these plants that are endangered and, you know, starting them from seed, propagating them, and distributing them so that they'll be growing somewhere. So.
Okay. So when someone comes to you with an ailment, what can people expect when they go in for a consultation with a registered herbalist?
Okay. And it may vary a little bit, but I know the Ayurvedic practitioners do much the same as I do. I have on my website, I have intake forms, which first of all, it covers all the body systems to give me a sort of an overview of what's happened to these people in the past, and also then what, of course, their main concern is. I also want to look a diet diary for 7 days, and that should also include supplements, any medication, when they take them, and supplements. Did I say supplements? And a waiver and release.
Okay. So, and obviously you're looking at, you know, the whole person. You're not just looking at the specific ailment.
No.
Right. Okay, perfect. Well, Susan, you know, this has been fascinating. Obviously, this is a multi-layered subject that we could probably sit here and talk about for hours. But I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show and enlightening us about herbal medicine. And thank you for watching. And until next time, light and love. Bye-bye for now.